Well, I guess the main idea is to improve workplace effectiveness, both from the perspective of helping managers and supervisors to be more effective leaders, and to help the employees to be more engaged in the whole process and succeed in their jobs.
Before going on the air today, why don't we continue with what we were talking about off the air. One of the big challenges for both management and the employees is the change when you have a new boss come in, and the boss is adjusting to the new staff and the new staff is adjusting to the new boss. Talk about that and how you recommend it be handled.
Well, I think the most important thing in any organization is that there's a good level of trust among the people in the organization. So when someone new comes in, it does take some time to build the trust. Not to oversimplify, but I think one of the keys is the more positive interactions you have with somebody, the more trust there is, the better the relationship is. So for example, if I have a new boss, especially if I liked my old boss, I may have a tendency to reserve judgment or be very guarded or even cold shoulder the new boss, and expecting that person to be my old boss is not going to work. What I should do is do my best to understand what the requirements of my new boss are and to work successfully with that person. As the trust level increases, as an employee, I can actually have the ability to even influence that boss in a positive way and to be more successful myself. Likewise for the new boss coming in, I think very often the managers coming in need to spend more time not trying to change things or fit in, but to form good relationships with the employees so that, again, we can have a good level of trust and communicate effectively as to what we need to do to succeed together.
How does a new boss handle bringing in his own team to work with the current team? That's always a little challenging, isn't it?
Yeah, that's kind of like a political situation in a way, and it seems like a terrible situation. You know, the old cronies are coming in, you know, with the new boss, and I don't stand a chance. But I think it actually goes back to the other point where this manager coming in with people they're used to working with already has a high level of trust and confidence with those people. That's probably why they brought them along. And again, I think that's where the opportunity for you, if you're not part of that group, to try to improve relationships with that new group coming in.
Something which was suggested to me when I was just getting into business was always make it a point every day with a smile on your face to walk by and say hello to the general manager. How are you doing? But you keep walking. But every day you do that, and because you're smiling and make it the effort to say hello to him, that it's a very effective way without getting into politics or anything. Do you suggest that? Yeah,
and also for that manager to do the same. It's what we used to call managing by wandering around, MBWA. I would also advise that general manager to get around and see as many of the people as possible and say good morning, hello to them.
Now, you help companies maximize individual team and organizational performance. Let's start out with and we're sort of getting into this already, the leadership development. How do you work in that area?
Well, some of the basic things that are lacking in organizations today are the coaching skills. Lots of organizations that I work in, for example, will say, well, we have a problem with accountability. There are people not doing things they should be doing, and they're not being held accountable. And that is very important, but first I suggest, well, are we being clear on what people are expected to do to begin with? Because the number one reason people don't give us the results we're looking for, it's not really motivation, it's not laziness, it's not being clear on what I'm expected to do. So we kind of start at the beginning, and one of the things that's very interesting is most of our organizations do performance evaluations, and typically you get an evaluation on some kind of a scale, maybe from 1 to 5, from outstanding down to unsatisfactory. What's lacking there is people really don't have a good sense of what performance looks like at the satisfactory level, at the exceeding that level, and maybe at the outstanding level. And one of the things that I try to help managers to understand is if you can calibrate the descriptions of performance to match your performance management system, what you're now telling people is how to succeed. And it takes the biggest obstacle out of the way. In other words, I know what I need to do to keep my job, and I also know what the extra things are that I can do to be regarded as more valuable than just someone who's meeting the requirements.
Well, there are some people in organizations that are kind of like a sponge, where they have a particular job assignment, but they just absorb many responsibilities, and sometimes the boss doesn't realize that. You find that in a lot of organizations as well?
Well, I think a lot of us have experienced that in our careers, and I've had advice along the way, which people would say you have to toot your own horn, you have to let people know what you're doing, and again, I tend to not to put it all on the leaders. I look at this as a leader's responsibility. There's an old saying that sounds kind of punitive, but it's not. You don't get the results that you expect, you get the results that you inspect. And what I try to ask leaders to do is watch what people are doing, not just so that you can catch them doing things wrong and hold them accountable, which again is important, but to praise them and to reinforce the right kinds of behaviors.
Well, one of the things I do is on a regular basis is if you do something just to subtly, there's a way to toot your horn with not becoming aggressive. Okay, got this done for you, got that done for you. You have to do that. So it's like someone said once, you have to work at your job, and then after you work at your job, you have to work at keeping your job. Would you suggest that as well?
Well, I think it's very true, and I remember kind of objecting to what one of my bosses asked us to do. We had he called it a monthly highlight report, and it was just, and I felt like it was just an additional thing to do where you basically had to outline your progress and all the different projects and tasks that you were working on. But what I realized was this was a way to keep my boss informed and also to toot my horn, let them know about the successes that I was managing to attain during the month. After I stopped working for that person, what I started to do is something similar because I found it was very helpful to let your boss know what you're accomplishing. And I would just send a little email, FYI, on the subject line, and do something similar, not as involved as this highlight report, but just kind of bullet out the different things that I've accomplished during the month. So that was a non-aggressive way, as you described, to let your boss know what you're doing. And I always got good feedback from all of my managers after that. Whenever I would send those FYIs on a monthly basis or every few weeks, that, hey, I love your FYIs because I know what's going on and I feel like I don't have to chase you around. But actually, from my perspective, it was a way to let them know what I was accomplishing that they might not have noticed otherwise.
Also, there's a difference between a boss and a department head who is your boss, mid-level management. And sometimes you can have a great boss, but your immediate supervisor, the department head, can be terrible. How do you advise people to handle that situation?
Well, that supervisor has a boss, and that's really who I'm looking to again, just like any other employee, let that supervisor know what you expect them to do, reinforce the right behaviors, discourage the wrong behaviors. And I hate to put it this way, but if a supervisor is not going to be an effective leader, after you try to coach them, and I think you have to use good judgment as to how long you're going to do that, you have to decide whether or not to remove that person. The old saying goes, people don't quit jobs, they quit supervisors, because the supervisor probably has more to do with your morale and understanding of how to succeed than anyone else in the organization. Lots
of folks do a great job, and all of a sudden they get promoted into a management position, and they've had no management experience. One of the things your firm offers is new management training. I want to talk about that a little bit and why it's so important.
It is, because depending on the type of work the organization is doing, it makes perfect sense to say, well, look, this is the person that understands how things work, so we need this person to be the supervisor. But as you say, they may not have the leadership skills that are needed. They have the technical skills, but not the leadership skills. So that's an area that I really look forward to, because I understand, being in that position, how that can happen. Sometimes the person didn't even want to be the supervisor, but that was the only choice. Hey, we need you to take this job, and you're the only person for it. So even the reluctant supervisor is great for me to get a chance to work with. We work with them in classroom settings with other supervisors, and also I do one-on-one coaching with them to kind of determine through assessments and coaching where their strengths and weaknesses are, and to help them to be more successful leaders.
Okay, oh my God, I've just become a department head. I really didn't want the job. What is the first thing you offer to that victim or person who got promoted, depending on how you want to look at it? What is the first piece of advice you offer them?
Well, a couple of years ago, it kind of reminds me of a situation where a fellow, and this was in the lumber industry, when he first started working for the organization, he was very young, he wasn't very serious, he kind of fooled around a lot and had a reputation of being kind of a goofball on the job. Well, he started to understand that there were opportunities in the organization, he became more serious, got more successful, and eventually, after a few years, he's now going to be the supervisor for the whole second shift, which is composed of a lot of folks that knew him and his his old tricks and knew him very well.
When he was the goof-off.
When he was a goof-off, absolutely. And so we had a little discussion about that, and I believe in being honest. And what he did was really great. The first thing he did is met with the folks that he was going to start to supervise, got them together, and he said, look, you know me, and you know how I was when I first got here, and after the laughter died down, he reminded them that he started to realize that there's a lot of opportunity in this organization. He became more serious and talked about the things that he's been doing, his plans for helping that second shift to be successful. So he, on the one hand, admitted what they already knew, and they would have kind of held against him if he didn't, but he also let them know what the new person was going to be like, what their new supervisor was going to be like. And I think that's very important. The things that you say to your group when you first meet with them, when you're first taking over the operation, I think are very important. It's like we talked about before the show started, you don't get a second chance at a first impression.
Right.
And even though they knew him before, this was his first opportunity to address them as their leader. So I think honesty goes a long way. It's one of those positive interactions that helps you build the trust with the group. And when you think about it, if you trust your boss, you can do just about anything for them.
Well, there's a situation at a local municipality where a person came in to take over a certain department that had been out of control, and his first day with the staff, he yelled at the staff about how they had been out of control and it was not going to be that way anymore. And he didn't last too long. Mm-hmm. So it's a different approach. Now, one of the things that happens in families and at the office is conflict. And one of the things that your company specializes in is conflict management. Want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, one of the fun things that I like to do with groups. Well, yeah. Well, one is I kind of asked the group to just kind of write down, the individuals in the group, the training session, to write down the first 3 words to come to mind when it comes to conflict. And usually they're pretty negative words. And then as we go along in the session.
Are they arable words?
Well, words like anger and, discomfort, losing, things like that. Because very often, and I felt this way for a long time, when there's a conflict, there's a winner and there's a loser. Well, that's not how things work in families, well, not if they're going to be effective, or with groups at work. We talk about the win-win. You want people to resolve conflict in a way that is beneficial to both sides and beyond compromise. So one of the things I like to do is use a little assessment tool, and what you do is you read over these different descriptions of ways to handle a conflict, and I will anonymously ask people to choose theirs, and many people will choose, believe it or not, avoiding, or letting the other side win, accommodating, or compromise. Lots of people think compromise is the best way to resolve a conflict. And some people look at collaboration, and there are others that look at a win-lose type of approach, a competitive approach. This is the way I like to go into a conflict. I want to win. And what that gives us an opportunity to do is the person understands where they're starting from in terms of their attitude toward conflict, and then talk about why avoiding is not usually the best thing to do, or accommodating the other side, or taking the win-lose approach, and even how compromise is often not the best way to resolve a conflict. And then we can move forward and talk about different ways to become more collaborative, and also how to look out for the kind of negative tactics that some of the win-lose people will use.
Why is, if you know that you're not getting along with someone, I've done that where, that's not my fault or his fault, we just didn't get along. Mm-hmm. And I found it was better to avoid the person unless we actually had to deal with one another. Why bother hanging around with someone that doesn't care for you any more than you have to? You don't recommend that? Well,
if there's not a business necessity for us to cooperate with each other, then sure, I guess we can give each other room. Another opportunity, though, is if we do need to work together, is again to work on the relationship. It might not be fun, I might not look forward to it, but I think the truth of the matter is if we can improve the relationship, we can influence one another in a more positive way. So, if I don't have to work with you, then I guess avoiding makes sense. It also makes sense to avoid a conflict when the emotions get too high, or let's say if the issue is just not important enough. Why fight over something that really doesn't matter?